hormone, the baby's brain, the baby's adrenal glands are putting out adrenal hormones like androgens, which get converted to estrogen, which make oxytocin receptors start to build up in the mom's uterine wall. And then ultimately what ends up happening is that stretch and that pressure down on the cervix and sort of in this position getting ready to be born, it triggers a whole release of oxytocin. This OCT is oxytocin from the woman's brain, from the posterior pituitary, okay? And then oxytocin starts to trigger contractions of the uterine wall. Those contractions actually cause a release of something called prostaglandins. These are local little chemicals that get released from the uterine tissue. Prostaglandins, which further cause contraction of the uterine wall, and then there's more contraction of the uterine wall, and so that ends up recreating this positive feedback cycle where there's more stretch, more contractions, more activation of more oxytocin, production of more prostaglandins, and the cells making up the myometrium are just pumping out prostaglandins and responding to oxytocin. Now notice that the estrogen allows the production of oxytocin receptors. Whenever you see R, it usually stands for receptors. So these are oxy receptors. So the mom's uterus now is totally capable of responding to oxytocin. Well, oxytocin, although it's involved in bonding, connection, love, closeness, all these different things, it's also involved in labor, initiating labor, and in the processes of breastfeeding or lactation, nursing. So it's got really key reproductive roles in human beings as well as other animals. So a lot of oxytocin, a lot of prostaglandins, and really help to this massive, and this is what your book, and this is what we'll refer to, positive feedback of prostaglandins, contractions, and oxytocin relief. What's a positive feedback is one stimuli or one chemical or hormone or stimuli causes something to happen, and then that something happening causes more release of that chemical or that hormone, which causes more contraction. So this, I will just say, is one of the most dramatic examples of positive feedback in all of biology. Because more of it results in more contractions result in more prostaglandins, more oxytocin, boom, 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 till the whole body is building to basically contract and squeeze down and get this baby out. And that can take a few hours to 24 hours to 36 hours, depending on who you are and if it's your first baby or not. Those tend to take longer. So this is a lovely positive feedback process. How can you initiate labor if somebody's going to be induced? Say they're going over their 41 weeks, they're getting nervous, the baby's getting too big, the mom might have gestational diabetes, right? So her blood sugar levels are too high, blood pressure is a little too high, she's kind of in a risk category. What would you use to induce labor?
Is that when you do a C-section?
No, that's an emergency C-section or a scheduled C-section. Oxytocin. Now, we do different derivatives of this that are the same exact thing. It's called Pitocin. It's a derivative of oxytocin. Does the exact same thing. It causes smooth muscle contraction. Actually, of not just the uterus, but also of the breasts. The ducts, the lactiferous ducts inside of the breast to help expel milk during lactation. So that's how it's actually done. And this initiation of labor, this is just showing in the fetal side, the adrenal glands are involved in putting out cortisol, and the placenta is actually making corticotropin releasing hormone, and then making prostaglandins here. The placenta is helping make the prostaglandins as well, so is the uterine tissue. And then on the maternal side, boom, it gets the response, all this positive feedback of estriol and prostaglandins. Tell the pituitary of the woman, okay, start dumping out oxytocin. Let's get this labor going. Let's make all these contractions really start to ramp up and get more forcefully. So it increases receptors for oxytocin and prostaglandins and allows this process to really get underway and ramp up. Okay, so those are sort of some key, believe it or not, some of the stress hormones, and then estrogens and prostaglandins really help to feed into the maternal side to trigger labor. There are a lot of differences between the male and female pelvis. Okay, so here's the female pelvis, here's the male. Of course, the male is slimmer, sort of more elongated, not splayed out as much, so it's thinner in circumference. The female pelvis is more wider, splayed out more to the side, has a larger true pelvic inlet, so the bowl where the baby's head actually has to go through. I showed you these in lab, right? The pubic arch, so the mons pubis is right here, right? So the opening, the vaginal opening is just below that. This space right here in anatomy, we call that the pubic arch, is much wider in the female pelvis than it is in the male. In the male, it makes a V. In the female, it makes a U. And the true pelvis, or pelvic inlet, is way more suited, it is suited for the head of a baby. And you saw this in lab, right? It can fit right down there sideways and then twist to go into more of the vertical position. But it's actually built, and anatomical structure is made for delivery of the baby's head and the actual baby. So there are lots of contractions during labor that ramp up. So the types of contractions during the different stages of labor, they change. So stage one of labor, so it's stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. Stage 1 is just all of the contractions that are building up to be able to enable the woman's body to get the baby out of the body. So it's contractions building in duration and in getting closer together. So at first they start off further apart every 5 to 20 minutes or so, and they last about 30 seconds. It depends on the woman and their perception of pain, but for me, these were never that bad. They're painful, but you could just stop and just chill for a minute, and then you can resume doing what you're doing. For most people, we call this early labor, or early stage 1 labor. Then they start to get harder, okay? And the interval between is about 1 to 3 minutes, and this is truly like active stage 1 labor. The body contractions of the uterus are about 60 seconds, 45 to a minute and a half, and they're about a minute to 3 minutes apart. They're coming very regularly, and they're coming hard and forcefully. And these will build and build and build until they start summing together. They get so close together that they're a minute to a minute and a half, they're only a minute apart, and then they start to get to the point where they're like almost on top of each other. This is actually stage 1 transition, so the woman in this part, the head of the baby, is now in sort of the vaginal canal, going through the cervix, and now there's usually an urge to push at later stages here, because the head is now dropped down and is kind of slowly going down into the vaginal canal. And this is really helping to expel the baby. The actual expulsion, so this is at the end, we call stage 2, is where the baby is actually coming out. Okay, so the baby is actually coming out, expelling from the uterus. They're very close together. Again, there's little gaps, and they're very close together. This varies a lot. And typically these stages are longer. This is a longer stage in general of pushing the baby out with the first baby. It can be 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. It varies a lot. A lot of these also vary in between women. You could have sort of quicker here and then taking longer here, or the whole thing could just be very prolonged and taking a long time, especially with the first baby. So there's a lot of variation in this. So I will say, in general, so stage 1, this whole process is contractions, getting the woman's body ready to expel the fetus. I know it sounds weird, but to get the baby out to actually be born. So this stage 1, what has to happen is the cervix has to efface. We call it effacement, but it means thin, and it has to dilate. This is what the body is working to do during all these contractions. Here, the cervix is continuing to dilate from 7 to 10 centimeters. 10 centimeters is the maximum dilation that is trying to be achieved during the process of parturition, or stage 1. When you get to 10 centimeters, that means the cervix is completely dilated as far as it will go. 10 centimeters, which is just enough to allow the moving through and the stretch that's needed for the baby's head to go through at that point. So the cervix has to efface or thin, and it has to dilate. And that's what the uterus is actually doing. It's causing the baby to move into that position, thin out the cervix, and open it up so that the head can actually travel through the birth canal and come out. I will say, contractions often in the stage 1, the early stage 1, early dilation, and then really ramping up and getting full on dilated and going strong with the contractions. Many women you see in movies, what do you see in movies when they go into labor? Immediate, it's like immediate, it's like, right, they're like already, like they're here. That's transition. and that is horribly painful, and it takes a while for the body to usually build to that. It ramps up slowly, and kind of gets to that place, so everything's in gear and ready to go. What do you also see in movies? Like a woman's walking, doing her thing, and then
The water just breaks.
right, breaking of the water, or water breaks. My water never broke with all 3 of my kids. I thought, I'm supposed to have the water break, and this intense, like, nope, didn't even have it. Actually, my water broke in later parts of labor, way later, and it was like a slow leak. They can also use a tiny little tool, and they can break the water to help trigger the labor and make it go a little faster. So if a woman's water is not breaking during stage 1, and it's progressing along or not progressing fast enough, they can break the water, and oftentimes that'll help sort of speed up the process and allow the baby's head to really drop down on the cervix. So it's not like it is in movies, not at all. It wasn't for me, and it wasn't for almost anybody I know. Hardly ever water, especially for a first baby, a lot of times the water doesn't even break. So that's something that was sort of surprising to me. So if we look at effacement and dilation, before labor, here's the neck, the whole cervix, right? It's very closed up, and it's, it's not thin, it's nice and thick, and it's not open. This is early effacement, the cervix starts to thin. Complete effacement, it's totally thinned up now. Uterus is completely down, and the amniotic sac that's right in here in the uterus is completely down right above the vagina. Complete dilation there, it's completely open. So completely thin, and completely dilated. So at this point now, the head of the baby can actually proceed through, as long as the amniotic sac is still not in the way, and can go right down into the pelvis and into the birth canal. And so this is looking at, again, degrees of effacement and degrees of dilation. Before labor, okay, so it's very thick, starts to open up, again, it starts to open up, and starts to open up here a little bit further, so it's complete dilation. And these are occurring differently in different women. It's not like first you thin, and then you dilate, although many people do that. They'll start to, the cervix will actually start to thin out a little bit before it actually dilates. But this can have some variation in different types of women, different women. All right, but in general, effacement will occur, thinning will occur before the cervix is able to completely dilate. All right, so the different stages of labor, this goes through sort of the processes labeled A through F. Stages of labor, this is, okay, so stage 1, first stage, contractions of the uterus. And remember I said when we talked in our pregnancy panel during lab, for me the actual stage 2 of expulsion, so actually pushing the baby out through the vaginal cavity and out of the body, that was hard, but that was not as painful as the preceding stage 1. Because for me it was almost like, and many women described it, you have it when you get to the end, or you get to transition of stage 1. That's where cervix is effaced, cervix is fully dilated at 10, and the baby's head is actually starting to come through. And it gives a sensation of needing to push. It's almost like you have to go to the bathroom, sort of. It's like, oh, okay, I gotta push. And they'll even tell you, no, don't push, hold on, hang tight, you gotta make sure everything's good, ready to go. And then you wanna push when you have a contraction, so that the body is working together. You are using your skeletal muscles and your physical sort of movements, and your smooth muscle contraction of your uterus is actually all happening at the same time. So you can do it in one sort of section where you push for like 5 or 10 seconds or more, and then relax, and you wait till the next one comes, and you do it at the same time. For me, this is way more productive, and I felt like I was actually doing something now instead of just being in pain, just vulnerable, doing nothing. This was much more effective. So this is really the stage 2 where the infant is actually coming out. Now notice what they'll end up doing is the head sort of goes down, starts to get pushed sort of down and out through the vaginal canal, and then what ends up happening is the baby's head will turn sort of back of the head up. So in this sort of occiput anterior position, so the face is down, the head is up, just so it can clear out of the vaginal canal. And then what will happen is the head turns sideways, so it's almost looking to the left or it's looking to the right. And with the aid of the physician or the OB or the midwife or the doula or whoever's there, they can help sort of grab the head and get one shoulder out and then get the other shoulder out. And once the baby's head and shoulders, which are the widest in diameter, once those are out, the rest of the baby's body just falls out. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Once the head, all the pushing and simultaneously pushing along with your body, along with the uterus, the contractions in stage 2, Those are all working together. Once the head is cleared and one shoulder is clear, they kind of help to maneuver the other. The whole baby just goes, comes out within seconds. The most of the work is getting this head down through the vaginal canal and then out. Once that happens, it's very fast. They will consider a prolonged stage 2. That means too long of pushing and where the baby's head is kind of coming out and then going back in and then coming out, like not progressing. If this pushing goes for much more than 45 minutes, an hour of that gets to be too much. And if they at any point do fetal monitoring or they see heart rate of the fetus going way, way, way up or way, way, way down, that can give cause for concern and they can stop and then do an emergency C-section. Because don't want to be in this position. This happened to my sister. She had a long labor, 30 plus hours, and then she was at stage 2, pushing. He was crowning, and then going away and crowning. That went on for like 2 hours. And they had to say, you know what, you've done enough. You've done all you can do. We're going to need to just get him out because the heart rate is plummeting. And that happens to people, and that would be an emergency C-section. The very last stage, so this comes out, shoot, done. Stage 3 of labor is detachment and delivery of the placenta. And this happens anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes after the actual labor or delivery of the baby. It detaches from the uterine wall, placenta moves, umbilical cord comes out, all that just comes right out. It's a weird sensation, but it's nothing like what the woman just went through. So it kind of, once the baby's out, breathing on their own, they're breathing air, they're fine. They cut the umbilical cord. Sometimes they give the honor to whoever wants to do it, grandma, partner, whoever wants to do it. Usually it's not the mom that just went through all this and is looking at the baby. And so they cut it and then they clamp it off really tight and small on the baby. It actually makes a scar. What does that umbilical cord scar become?
The belly button.
Your belly button. We call it the umbilicus. The belly button, right? Mom also has one. Baby has one now too. And so that is stage 3. Stage 1, contractions ramping up, cervix doing what it's supposed to do, thinning and dilating, active propulsion of the baby getting out of the vaginal canal and out of the uterus. Stage 3, delivery of the placenta. Now, your book talks about, and it's a little bit dated in this regard, that many doctors will do an episiotomy. That means they will cut the vaginal opening just a tiny bit, sort of in that direction, so they can open up the vaginal cavity a little bit, so that it makes the head easier to come through the vaginal tissue. Many places, many doctors will not do this anymore unless it seems like it's going to be a real problem for size of the female or opening of the female. But most people will not do episiotomies. And if there's a little natural, this is going to sound bad, if there's a little natural tear or a tiny little tear, they do a stitch. And it's a resorbable stitch. It's just a one little stitch. And this has happened to my mom even back in the 70s had this. They didn't do an episiotomy. She just said, you know, let's just deal with it. And then afterwards she had a stitch and she told him, can you sew me up tighter than I was before? Put a little stitch in, totally fine. So it's something that commonly happens. Sorry, I know. There's another aspect of this a lot of people don't talk about, and that is if you're pushing, right, and you're having all these contractions, and then when you get to the stage of actual stage 2 labor, transitioning, full on pushing to get the infant out, a lot of women will poop. Okay, this is it, and this is what, you've heard this, right? Okay, so a lot of books don't talk too much about this, but it is a thing because if you imagine all of your muscles, your skeletal muscles on the outside and lining your body wall, and your uterine muscle, everything is contracting, right? Including your pelvic floor, your anal sphincter, all those muscles are like, so a lot of people, a little bit of poop will occur during stage 2 or late stage 1. And I remember I was really freaked out by this. Like I was freaked out by this, honestly, but just even the fact like, oh my God, I don't want to poop. I do not want to go through that when I'm labor and delivering. Like I don't want that to be a thing. And I don't think I did. Maybe one time I did, maybe 1 of the 3 times I did, but I have to tell you, the nurses and the doctors and the residents, everybody there, they're so good, typically with what they do, you don't even know. They're just like, okay, here we go. Like it's not even, you don't even realize it. So it's not a big deal, but it is, the whole body is contracting. So you can imagine, like there's a lot of force and contractions that are happening. This just summarizes the same thing in better colored pictures, where we have the cervix, the uterus, the vagina. Okay, so this is dilation early. So there's a little bit of opening. So at this point, early is like 1 centimeter to like 4 centimeters. If you look, that's just a tiny little small opening. So dilation at this point is very, very early. Dilation is you progress through stage 1. Late dilation is you're getting close to, the woman is getting close to 10 centimeters, right? Or somewhere around, in this case, it's fully dilated, so it's about 10 centimeters. You can see that fully encompasses the diameter of the infant's head, the baby's head, so that it can actually make it out of the uterus and go down the birth canal through the vaginal opening. So early labor, just to summarize, is stage 1, and we will say that's dilation and effacement of the cervix. That goes along with all of those building contractions that are happening. And they vary among women. I've had friends that say my contractions were not that bad. I mean, they were kind of spread out. They got closer and closer together, but they were not horrible. For me, the contractions were absolutely horrible. I preferred the actual pushing phase and the end of stage 1 because that process for me was not easy. And then the actual expulsion, so stage 2, right? Expulsion, delivery of the actual baby coming out. The head is actually turned sort of sideways. You go through the pelvic inlet of the pelvis. Then it turns with the back of the head up in that position. So there's first flexion of the neck and then extension of the neck. So it goes down and out with assistance, with a little bit of not tugging, but kind of holding the head and helping with movement of the shoulders. The whole baby is able to be born. Stage 3, or placental delivery, is at the very end. Okay, so that's sort of active labor, regular, increasingly painful contractions. Cervix is typically greater than 4 centimeters dilated. This is kind of just an indicator of when a woman is truly in real active stage 1 labor and going to be getting closer to stage 2 of delivery. Delivery of the baby is officially stage 2, placenta is stage 3. Length of labor, this is on the low end, and this really encompasses kind of everybody. First babies or first time moms going through labor and delivery can be way higher than this. Can be 16 hours, 20 hours, 24 hours, it can be way higher. Okay, so that's kind of just a measure of looking at a lot of different pregnancies or deliveries. So here's delivery of the infant, just a cartoon sort of edition. The head comes out, sort of at this point when the head is actually delivered, it's looking either to the right or left. So at first it goes straight up and down, kind of vertical, and then it turns sideways and then can come straight out. Delivery of the shoulders, one, and then the other, and then the baby comes completely out. Once it's breathing, the umbilical cord is cut, and then soon after, the placental tissues detach and come right out of the woman's body. Okay, so, sorry if this was a horrendous process to look at all of this from all these different biological standpoints and things that are going on, but it has a great result. The end product, this is my little Pee-wee when he was first born, and like I think I told you guys, he was so chubby and so fat. He was 10 pounds, 3 ounces, okay? Totally normal vaginal delivery, no drugs, no epidural. This guy came out pretty smooth. It was still very difficult, but he was giant. And I remember the nurses so I delivered to the pushing, he came out fast, so I pushed like 15 minutes, like 20 minutes, he was out. The nurse held him up, and he wasn't really crying, he was kind of making weird noises, and they kind of pushed on his butt, and he started crying real loud. But he couldn't open his eyes because he was too fat and swollen, so I didn't even see his eyes for like the first 24 hours. He couldn't even see, he couldn't open his eyes. But the nurse held him up. The nurse held him up, and it was funny, I remember looking at it when I was laying there just after pushing and sitting there looking, and she held him up like this, like Simba in Lion King, and just, he looked so long to me and big. I was like, oh, that came out of my body? Like, how was that? She said, actually, he looks more like a 3-month-old, like based on his size and height and weight and everything.
Oh, he has so much hair.
And he had a ton of hair. Yeah, all my kids are born with like massive hair. We called them like baby wigs. We were like, how's their hair? We had baby wigs. It's a thing. This is my cute little Lola though. She first got to hold him. She was so excited. She had named him Pee-wee before he was even born. So she started talking to him and she would tell him things like, hey little Pee-wee, little guy in there, little Pee-wee, I got some advice for you. Never run with scissors, okay? Don't run with scissors. She would just tell him like random things. So he was already Pee-wee before he was born. He's Emilio, really. But now he's 11, huge little guy playing basketball, doing all these things, and I still call him Pee-wee. And a lot of times he tells me, shh. But I still call him Pee-wee, I can't help it. This was a little picture of all of them. And he was super chubby, super fat. All my kids were real big. So they were 8 pounds, 8.5 ounces, 9 pounds, 1 ounce, and then 10 pounds, 3. So they just got bigger and bigger. So, yes, this is just contrasting labor in other primates, so similar and how they're different to humans. Notice in this one, a lot of times the baby ends up being sunny side up, so it comes out, the face faces up, and a lot of times they're sitting and squatting behaviors, like so the mom can like actually catch the baby being born itself, her little infant or neonate. So there's squatting, sitting, and standing positions. A lot of times it's kind of hanging out, and she's doing everything. Sometimes there's little assistants. There's little like little doula assistants that will kind of help her, you know, in doing this. But individually, they get it done. It's a shorter process, and there's some differences in the way that the baby actually comes out and the way the mom does it. Okay, so I'll stop right there for a second. There are also, we talked about different labor and delivery positions. So I think in lab we talked about that. Now there are all kinds of contraptions and different things that allow different positions to speed up the labor and delivery process. Lactation, what time is it? Is that clock right?
Yeah.
Just a minute, okay. So I guess I'll stop right here. And you guys, we don't have any class for a week, so we have a break. So catch up on all your stuff, get rest, get some good turkey or whatever you like to eat, have a good, happy Thanksgiving. And make sure you review stuff and get on top of stuff, because when we come back, we have 1 week. We have the research project presentations, we got a lot of stuff in here, and then we go into finals. So we got to power it out. So make sure you rest, but also stay on top of your stuff. See you later. Bye. See you guys later.
Is the paper due the day of the final?
The